So I'm pretty privileged to be speaking with Mario Deanda tonight. He is the Director of Scholarships at the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, and he oversees all kinds of programs there that support graduating high school seniors, undergrads, reentry students, and grad students. His entire career has been dedicated to expanding college access for low-income and first-generation youth. And in the past, he has led post-secondary programs at Big Picture Learning, managed scholarship programs for the Hispanic Scholarship Fund. And he's been a senior financial aid administrator at the University of Notre Dame. He is a proud son of Mexican immigrants growing up in El Paso, Texas. He earned a BA in economics and psychology from University of Notre Dame and a master's in education from San Francisco State. He now lives in San Francisco, and I think of Mario as Mr. Scholarship. So I'm glad to be talking to Mario tonight. And I think we'll start with a pretty general question, Mario, that you're the pro here. And also at some point tonight, there's been scholarship news lately, so I'm sure we'll get to that. But why don't we try to start by putting scholarships into context within the larger topic of financial aid? So obviously, funds that don't need to be repaid are preferable to what we call self-help, like loans and work study. But how do scholarships and grants fit into the big picture?
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you for having me here, both Alice and Charlene. Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and thank you for hosting this session for families to learn more about scholarship opportunities and how to navigate a very complex system for financial aid. In the larger context of financial aid, keep in mind that there are about 2,500 four-year colleges and universities across the U.S. Less than 1% of those colleges and universities claim to meet the full financial need of aid for students. So that means that scholarships come into play to help students afford, and generally just afford a college education, but they also play a role in allowing students to make a decision between attending a 2-year or 4-year college, sometimes living on campus or living off campus. And this is sometimes often important for students who have a lot going on at home, being able to have a place where they can study and have some privacy is important. So being able to afford off-campus housing, especially here in the Bay Area, this happens to be one of the most expensive cost of education for students is housing in the Bay Area. But it allows students to expand their opportunities and also to participate in like examples of study abroad, for example, with scholarship support that students might have, especially for those students who do not have a full need that's being met. It's also important to think of scholarships not just as an annual form of financial assistance, but really thinking about scholarships, how they support you all the way through college completion and what kind of opportunities those scholarship opportunities can open up for you. So prioritizing scholarships that are aligned to the student's educational career interests, that provide holistic support services such as mentoring or connections to summer jobs or internship opportunities. We have one of our scholarships that we administer at Silicon Valley Community Foundation is the Latino SIG Technology, and that program allows students to access holistic support services with the Hispanic Foundation of Silicon Valley, but also to participate in internship opportunities, for example. So there's more than just the financial benefit of having a scholarship. So navigating through all those different sources to find those scholarships that are a good fit for the students is really important. On the financial aid piece, as students receive financial aid and packaging at the financial aid offices, often these outside scholarships will replace self-help, which is the work study or loans. And this means that students don't have to work as many hours as they would have had to work without the scholarship support, or it reduces also the level of indebtedness that students graduate with.
Thank you for that context. That's great. I always told students that when they earned a scholarship, somebody was making an investment in them. And I really believe in having students see themselves as worthy of being invested in. Let's dispel a myth that I'm really surprised to hear still circulating. And that is that if a student just works really hard, he or she can cover the whole cost of college, whether they receive financial aid or not, by diligently applying for scholarships. Can you please explain why this is a myth?
Sure, sure. And I'll reference again that 1% of universities here in the US, four-year colleges and universities claim to meet the full financial need of students. So already the fact is that students need some kind of form of financial aid to make it through college. Just applying for scholarships is often not sufficient. And also many scholarship providers require that students apply for general financial aid through the FAFSA. So applying for federal aid, Cal Grant, state aid here in California is also essential. And the combination of all those resources help students afford a college education. Applying for scholarships alone is a bit of a myth. In many cases, many scholarships are only one time. And often they're only available for students as they're graduating high school seniors. So that means they're available for your freshman year. And often those scholarships do not continue beyond your freshman year. So if you're relying on scholarship support, it would require a lot of renewable scholarship aid and also ensuring that you're meeting the requirements to have all those scholarships renewed every year. So the safest bet is for students to always apply for the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, to tap into any federal grants, Pell Grants, student loans that they can tap into. And it also qualifies them for the Cal Grant here in California.
Yeah, so if you find a student who is covering the entire cost of a college education by applying for scholarships, I think you may have found a unicorn.
Absolutely.
So when I posted scholarships for my students at MA, I categorized them by state and national, local, or institutional. By institutional, I mean money from the colleges themselves. I encouraged them to apply for any scholarships if they met the criteria, but to focus most of their attention on those local scholarships. Can you please talk about those categories? And maybe also, as you're talking about those categories of scholarships, let's add a fourth category, which is scams. And you can talk about how students and families can recognize scholarships that aren't state and national, local, or institutional, but are scams.
Absolutely. Thank you. Great question. And both two questions that are excellent questions. On the first one, I'm not, I'm not sure if it's an issue of local, national, regional scholarships. And to your point, encouraging students to apply for as many scholarships as possible, with knowing that students will not receive every single scholarship that they apply for. So you increase your chances of receiving some scholarship support by applying to as many as possible. But it's really about students identifying the best choices for themselves. And again, referencing the fact that looking for scholarships that align to a student's educational interests or career interests, scholarships that provide holistic support services, looking at renewable scholarships as well, scholarships that go beyond one-time awards freshman year that continue. Some scholarships are 2-year renewable, some are 3, some are 4. I've seen 6-year renewable scholarships as well. So those are all things that students should take into consideration as they're looking for scholarship support and prioritizing the ones that are most important to them, and the most that seem the best fit for them as well, whether it's a local scholarship or regional scholarship or a national scholarship. And often local scholarships will be smaller scholarship supports. These are often small nonprofits that are serving the local community, and some of the larger organizations tend to be national organizations that provide greater support as well. But again, keeping in mind, looking at renewable scholarships, looking at scholarships that align to a student's interests, whether it's a local or national scholarship, is really what's important, is for students to identify the good fit for them. Also look at how long the application is. If you're completing a really long application at the end, you might get a 500 scholarship. Look to other applications that might offer a more generous scholarship. So the time that it also takes you to complete the application requirements. If you're applying for a scholarship $500 and they're asking for 2 letters of recommendation, you might want to look at other options as well to maximize your opportunities. But keep in mind that you're also investing, students are investing time. So the time that takes into completing an application, the output of what the potential award could be, those are factors that students should also take into consideration. On the scam part, we used to talk about one type of scam. Now there are multiple types of scams, and I'll touch on the latter. But the former type of scam is phishing scams as well that we're seeing more of now. And I'm not an IT person, but I think we've all been familiar with getting those emails, phone calls, text messages on our phones, and so forth. So just navigating through those and being really careful about what information you share with someone on the phone, what information you share with someone electronically, and so forth. So just navigating any kind of phishing scams. But there are other types of scams that are a little more sinister because they actually come across as legitimate scams. And these are often scams where they might ask you to send us $20 and we'll send you some scholarship opportunities. And basically they print out a scholarship list and they email it or mail it to the student. Those are just folks who are looking for opportunities to make money, but really don't have a lot to offer back to the students. So anytime someone is asking the student to pay for a scholarship opportunity, that's a flag. That's a red flag right there. If there's not a physical address to the organization, there's only a PO box or there's no telephone number to call. Those are all red flags. So being careful about any scholarship scams that seem legitimate. And so use some caution and looking at physical addresses, anything that could present the organization as a legitimate organization is super important. If you do fall into a scam, you should report it to the Federal Trade Commission or to the state's Attorney General's office as well. But definitely report any scams to prevent others from falling into these scams as well.
You mentioned the investment students make in time applying for scholarships. And I was remembering a student I knew quite a while ago who did something, I don't know very many students who do this, but who kept track of her time in applying for scholarships. And she got a few scholarships and didn't get a few others. And she did the math problem and she said, I was making $1,800 an hour while I was applying for scholarships.
That's excellent.
But I thought that was interesting. Well, while we're talking about categories of scholarships, can you please talk about merit-based scholarships and need-based scholarships? And this is common lingo that we use in college and financial aid terms, merit-based, need-based. I think it'd be great if you could define them. And then for those need-based scholarships, maybe you can give us some hints about how need is generally determined by those who offer need-based scholarships.
Absolutely, absolutely. The first point I'll make around need-based scholarships is often when we talk about need-based scholarships, the merit component is often ignored. At Silicon Valley Community Foundation, we award our scholarships based on need to ensure that students who are receiving the awards actually have a need for educational support. But at the same time, they're also about 85% of the total score is based on merit. So we also look at merit, and that's the academic component. We look at transfers, we look at GPA. So even though at the end we're awarding scholarships based on need, we're also awarding students based on their merit. And that's important to highlight. Often merit-based, solely merit-based scholarships ignore the need component. So the funding can go to a student who doesn't have any need, so who already has the resources to attend the choice of college that they've enrolled in and afford the college. So those are very drastic differences. So I did want to highlight around the need component, ensuring that we also factor in merit often into these conversations. In terms of the difference between these, need is students who apply for federal aid through the FAFSA and are eligible for any kind of need-based federal aid, whether it's a federal loan or a Pell Grant, or they qualify for the Cal Grant here in California as well, often fall into the category of need-based aid. Those students are by federal requirements, any resources that they receive have to be packaged into their cost of education and has to factor in what their demonstrated need is based on the free application for federal student aid. The way that often universities look at need and package students, they look at the total cost of education. They look at the family contribution, which is family contribution. Expected family contribution is not the student aid index. So they look at the student aid index to determine how much the family can contribute towards the cost of education. And based on that, they establish a need, and that's the unmet need that the student has based on the total cost of education, subtracting what the families can contribute and the student can contribute, and any kind of institutional aid that the student is or federal aid, pardon me, federal aid that the student qualifies for, Pell Grant, need-based loans, or if they qualify for state aid. Typically, these are often Pell Grants are entitlements. So if a student qualifies for a Pell Grant, they're eligible to receive it. Likewise with the Cal Grants. These are entitlement programs for students. Beyond that, once the federal aid, any kind of state aid has been packaged, and in most cases, our colleges here in across California often rely on the Cal Grant. Some of the UCs and some of the CSUs have additional resources that they award to students for institutional scholarships, but most of these colleges rely on the Cal Grant to help students fund their tuition. So often, these are resources that are available to students, but everything has to be packaged into the student's financial need. When you have a merit scholarship, it doesn't matter if the student is receiving need or not. If the student has, or the student doesn't even have to apply for the FAFSA if they're receiving the merit scholarships. And often, if it's institutional aid, often these could be full rights for students that would disqualify them for any kind of outside scholarship.
And merit can mean all kinds of merit. I mean, we often think of scholarships based on academic merit, but there are cheerleading scholarships and, of course, athletic scholarships and music scholarships. And so that word merit, the other thing I was thinking as you were talking about it is families find it frustrating when filling out the FAFSA that there's no place to talk about special circumstances. And if students and families have special circumstances, when you apply for scholarships, there's often generous space to talk about special circumstances. Those students can talk about special circumstances with the financial aid administrators at their colleges as well. But scholarships are often very interested in students' special circumstances.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is the recourse that students have if when they submit the FAFSA, it does not allow for any special consideration, but institutions have what they exercise professional judgment committees, and they can students can appeal. Often it could be a parent lost a job, so the FAFSA will be looking at the prior year income. So they'll need to make an adjustment. That's when they need to work with the financial aid office, and it is encouraged for students to appeal their federal aid if there are changes to their economic situations that were not reflected in the FAFSAs that were submitted.
Even though we're not quite at our Q&A yet, I'm going to sneak in an audience question because I think your response to it will be relevant. The audience person is saying, wait a minute. If a person doesn't qualify for a Pell Grant or a Cal Grant, then what's the point of listening to this? In other words, there are no straight merit scholarships to apply for. That's not the case, so I thought you might want to address that before we lose some audience members.
Oh, correct. So there are opportunities. There are merit scholarships out there. Also, institutions often have merit institutional aid that they offer, often full rights or athletic scholarships, music scholarships, and so forth. So those are available. Often, what we're talking about in these conversations are folks who are looking for additional resources beyond what the federal government can provide or state governments can provide as well.
Okay, so there are a variety of ways, and we may talk about some of those in the Q&A for students and families to seek merit scholarships. Um, there's a really widely misunderstood aspect of scholarships, and it's called scholarship displacement. I happen to know that you are one of the country's experts on scholarship displacement. So I thought you could maybe explain what it is, which colleges use it, and what changes have come about because of a relatively new law in California. And then if we have time, I'll say why scholarship displacement never really bothered me as much as it bothers a lot of other people.
Absolutely, absolutely. So a couple of things about college displacement. Just to clarify this, when we talk about displacement, there is good displacement, there's bad displacement. Good displacement is an institution accepting an outside scholarship for a student taking that outside scholarship and reducing either the work study or the self-help components, or the work study or student loans, the self-help component of the financial aid award package. That's good displacement. Bad displacement is when the institution takes those funds, and I worked at an institution many years ago. We had certain practices where the institution takes that outside scholarship, and instead of reducing loans or work study, they reduce institutional gift aid. At that point, the student is not any better off than they were prior to receiving the outside scholarship. Also, with outside scholarships, often donors give the funds to foundations, nonprofits, with the idea that that money is intended for the students. So when the institutions take the funds and replace institutional aid with an outside scholarship, again, the benefit is not going to the student, it's going to the institution at that point. So you can think of it as rather than a contribution or donation to the student's educational services, it's a donation to the institution, because again, the student has been left in the same situation they had prior to that. So there's good displacement, there's bad displacement. In 2022, California basically approved legislation, AB 288, that officially bans all displacement of institutional gift aid across all California public institutions and also private institutions. Now, keep in mind that there are federal requirements and federal guidelines that institutions have to follow. So oftentimes federal guidelines can override state law as well, and we're still seeing displacement even today. But the difference is, and because institutions are aware that they cannot displace, what we're seeing is a lot of institutions working collaboratively with scholarship providers to remedy these situations with students. And often what we do is at Silicon Valley Community Foundation, we have 3 steps to try to rectify these situations when students have their institutional gift aid displaced. The first one is students have the option of submitting a request for a budget increase. And that requires putting a list of budget expenses that are not already factored into the student's cost of education. These could be uninsured medical expenses. They could be higher transportation costs. It could be a computer. If a student has a 10-year-old computer and they need a new computer. Often, institutions will take all this into consideration. So students submit a request for a budget increase with a list of budget items that they would like for the institution to consider, and that gets submitted to the financial aid office. We provide this guidance to our scholars. They submit the letter. Often institutions will review that, and in most cases they will approve unless it's something totally outrageous. But if it's related to the student's educational costs, they will approve, including laptops and computers, to accommodate the outside scholarship. And we find that in most cases, we usually resolve the issue with the cost of budget increase. When that doesn't work, the second option for students is to think about summer school. If you're going to lose, in some cases, depending on what the funding is and how much students might be losing, if they have an opportunity to complete summer school and get ahead, or take some additional courses that they would like to consider, and not have to work that summer, that's another option. And in those cases, we work with the institution to convert a 9-month budget into a 12-month budget, which allows the students to accommodate that outside scholarship into the total cost of education for 12 months versus 9 months. In the case where that doesn't work, those 2 options are not feasible for the student or the institution. Our third option for students is we will allow students to defer the award for 1 year. Due to displacement. We allow deferments for more than 1 year if it's a medical leave of absence or students are participating in an internship program or something. But for displacement purposes, we allow a 1-year deferment.
So if we want to make this a little more personal to make it easier to understand, let's say you have a student who applies for a local Rotary scholarship and is granted $10,000, and the student is accepted at several colleges. Some of those colleges will take what you call the bad kind of displacement. In other words, they'll say, well, great, you got $10,000, but now we can award other students who have more need than you. Or the student might have a college that says, great, you have $10,000. Let's take that off your loans and your work study. So that's kind of a personal example of how it might work with
Exactly.
displacement. And I think the reason it hasn't offended me, displacement in the past, as much as it does others, is that I'm thinking from the institutional point of view, a college has certain resources to allocate. And many of these colleges have limited resources, and they want their resources to go to the neediest of students. And if a student is suddenly $10,000 less needy, the college, of course, is going to say to itself, well, maybe we can help someone else. But it really feels unfair to the students when they've worked hard and earned a scholarship and it's displaced. So.
Correct, especially if it doesn't displace the loans and work study and the students are left with the same package they had even prior to receiving the outside scholarship. Exactly.
But I'm glad we talked about it because this could be a surprise to students and parents that that could happen. What should students know when they're offered grants or scholarships from colleges that admit them? Can they usually count on renewing those scholarships? And are there questions that they should ask each college before accepting those offers, just to be sure that they're well informed?
Absolutely. Great question. And my first advice is never decline any institutional gift aid. So it's important for students to tap into any kind of gift aid that they're receiving. It's also important for students to understand what kind of renewal conditions are placed on those scholarships. So they understand whether it's a GPA requirement, it could be a field of study requirement. So it's important for them to inquire as to what are the conditions for me to be able to continue to receive this scholarship beyond my freshman year and ensure that it's also available beyond freshman year. Oftentimes, there are institutions who will package a really nice package for students in their freshman year, but then sophomore year, the gift aid gets reduced, more loans get packaged in, and so forth. So it's important for students to understand what am I going to receive in future years, not just in my freshman year, and understand, especially when they're receiving institutional gift aid, to understand if that's renewable and what are the conditions for renewing those resources as well.
Okay, those are great questions because um, a lot of times students will get their financial aid offers their freshman year. They'll see a grant and they may just assume that every year they'll have that grant. And when I'm talking to students about planning for paying for college, you really have to take the long view and think about 4 or more years. If you have a super generous grant that's only in the first year, you really need to know kind of how you're going to replace that in future years.
Absolutely, especially if that outside scholarship is meeting and making a difference with the unmet need, and that's what's making it possible, or institutional gift aid as well, is if that's that you're reliant to continue for the next 2, 3 years of your education. Super important.
And you know, I wasn't actually planning on bringing this up, but I've looked at financial aid offers with so many students, and they will see a very generous grant, $25,000. Wow, this college is giving me $25,000. That is great. But what you really need to think about is what we call the gap, which is the gap between what the college is going to cost and the total amount of financial aid. And if there's still $12,000, $15,000 of unmet need, it worries me when I see students and families say, oh, we'll figure it out, we'll make it work, because you're going to have that gap every year. And sometimes that gap can be filled by outside scholarships, but maybe not always for 4 years.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you for highlighting that. Super important. And just to make sure that people understand what this means is, for example, if you're attending a college where the total cost of education is 50,000 and you're getting a $25,000 scholarship, but you might be attending there's another offer for you for an institution where it's 25,000, but you're getting $20,000 in aid. Obviously looking at your out-of-pocket expense. What is the out-of-pocket cost for me? And looking at institution A with 50,000, your out-of-pocket cost there is 25,000. So even though you're receiving a much more generous scholarship, your out-of-pocket cost is still higher. So looking at the cost of attendance, looking at what the institution is offering you, what you might be able to receive in federal aid, state aid, and outside scholarships is important.
In a perfect world, Are we in a perfect world? I haven't noticed it if we are, but in a perfect world, every college's financial aid offer would follow the same format, and you could spread them out and look at them and have a really clear understanding. It doesn't work that way. They all have autonomy, so it's up to people like us to help students evaluate their financial aid offers. Well, back to the beginning of the process, if you were advising a student who's, say, a junior or a senior about scholarships, so how to find them, how to search for them, how to put their best foot forward when they're applying for them, what are some of the most important pieces of advice you would offer?
Absolutely, thank you. And great question as well. And again, prioritizing scholarships that align to the student's educational or career interests, right? That provide access to other opportunities such as internships or career support, holistic academic or social supports or other benefits, always important. And I leave that to the student's determination, right? So students should do some research, think about what kind of scholarships they're interested in. Also prioritize those renewable scholarships are always important. You want to have ongoing assurance that you have continued support beyond your freshman year. In order to strengthen, and I'll comment on how we review our applications here at Silicon Valley Community Foundation, but the personal statement or the writing essay, often it's a personal statement essay. It's always important. That's the introduction to the review committee. So what students write on those personal statements are read very carefully. So spending time on the key components of the application, which is often the personal statement and the letter recommendations are where much of our focus is spent in reviewing applications. And again, making sure that the application is complete in its entirety, so it's not flagged as incomplete, and submitting the application early. We have a practice here at Silicon Valley Community Foundation. If we get your application 2 weeks before the deadline, we will guarantee that we will follow up to see if there's something incomplete or something that we did not receive. We will follow up. But as we get about 50% of our applications about the week before the deadline, so we don't have an opportunity to go back to those students and do follow-up. So again, getting your application early gives the scholarship providers often the opportunity to get back to you with any feedback, whether it's complete or not. So super important to make sure the application is complete in its entirety, making sure that students spend time on the personal statement. The letter recommendation, ensuring that students find a recommender who can speak about their work outside of school and in school, and who can speak about their work positively. We will receive maybe it's one letter recommendation a year that we get where the review is very negative, and that's what we have. We have to accept that letter recommendation. So ensuring that students are identifying the right recommenders to provide a letter recommendation is very important for students.
And how should they, I know sometimes parents ask, well, how early can my students start applying for scholarships? And in my experience, there are not a lot of scholarships students can apply for before their senior year, maybe a few their junior year. But I always thought of scholarship season as being kind of from November through March. That's when there were the most. And I know at Menlo-Atherton, because that's where I was working, a weekly list of scholarships was posted and updated for students. But what are some of the other ways that, when can they start and how should they look?
Absolutely, very important. And again, the reality is most scholarships are available to students as graduating high school seniors. So often that's when those opportunities will be available. There are some scholarships that continue to be available to students once they've enrolled in college as undergraduates or graduate students as well. But often most opportunities for outside scholarships are available to graduating high school seniors. So super important for students to navigate these resources early. You want to start doing research. I've worked with secondary schools as well, and we had students doing research in their sophomore year and identifying scholarships that they might be interested in, and just getting familiar with the process, how to navigate, where to go look, so that when it comes time senior year to start really getting serious about it, applying, you have those resources identified. You've identified some scholarships that you're interested in, and others might pop up and some might disappear. Some are available one year, they're not available next year, and so forth. But really starting early in the students' high school years, sophomore year, by junior year, you should have by the end of your junior, you should have a list of scholarships that you might be interested in applying your senior year. and know how to navigate the FAFSA, federal aid, how to navigate the Cal Grant as well. And then senior year comes, and that's when you start going and applying. But doing the research in advance, so that way you can also identify the ones that you're really interested in and define the ones that you want to spend time completing and submitting those applications for. Very important.
You might also want to think about the fact that if you were only applying to UCs and Cal States, you will not need letters of recommendation to apply there. But you may want to talk to a teacher or counselor about a letter of recommendation for scholarships, so you're not scrambling and asking for it at the very last minute.
Absolutely. And give your recommender at least 2 weeks in advance notice before an application deadline is due to submit a letter recommendation. Don't go to recommender 24 hours before the deadline.
And I think it's really helpful when you give your recommender as much information as possible about the scholarship. Because, for example, the scholarship Charlene mentioned that was started for me after I retired, the primary criterion for selection was motivation. If you talk to someone who's writing a letter for you and say they're looking for highly motivated students, then the recommender can address that.
Absolutely.
Before we go to the Q&A, would you like to use this opportunity to tell us a little bit about the Silicon Valley Community Foundation and the wide variety of scholarships it offers? My favorite part is where you're going to tell them that if students apply for one of them and don't get it, they might get another. So I'm not sure everybody here knows what you do there. And then
Absolutely. Thank you.
we'll do Q&A.
Thank you. And yes, absolutely. Our scholarships open on December 1st, and the deadline is coming up February 28th. We have two types of programs. We have what we call SVCF managed, and those that's one application, one letter recommendation. When students go into our website, siliconvalleycf.org, you'll navigate into the SVCF managed. There are 22 programs under that. For those programs, students complete only one application to be considered. The way those are managed, if students, as they're completing the application and completing their demographic requirements and criteria and so forth, it's matching them to different programs that we have. And again, we have a total of 22 programs. Some are STEM, some are focused on geography, some are focused on GPA, and so forth. So students will be matched. If students are matched to more than one, we always consider students for the most generous one. If they get awarded a scholarship that's the most generous, we remove them from the queue. If they don't get awarded for the most generous one and they're eligible for other scholarships, we continue to go down the queue until we've exhausted all the possibilities for that student, and hopefully they get awarded a scholarship. But students only complete one application. They get matched to 22 programs, and if they're matched to all 22 programs, we consider them for each program. We do restrict scholarships to only one scholarship per student. We receive about 1,200 applications. We give out about 400 scholarships, so we try to reach as many students as possible. And our scholarships range anywhere from 500, in some cases, local scholarships that we have, up to about $40,000 as well. So I do want to highlight one very special scholarship that we have, and that is the Alice Kleeman and the Joseph Buttram Impact Scholarship. This is our second year administering the scholarship, and I want to share that this Joseph Buttram was a student of Alice Kleeman, and he credits Alice for being a great support. He was sort of an average student, C student, but made it through and became very successful after graduating, and credits Alice for believing in him and giving him an opportunity to finish high school and become the person that he is. So just as I was telling the story, I got some chills here. So I
Me
want to
too.
credit that. And when he
Me
established the
too.
scholarship, he wanted to honor Alice, so it's called the Alice Kleeman and Joseph Buttram Impact Scholarship.
And the
So
first year
again,
we did it, we awarded 25 $10,000 scholarships.
it's
Yeah,
two-year renewable. It's supporting students in their freshman and sophomore year, or transfers. Students who are also transferring into a 4-year, supporting them in their first 2 year. And the reason that was established is because typically that's when students are most vulnerable to drop out, or either for academic purposes or financial aid purposes and so forth in their freshman year. So the idea was to support students at least through the end of their second year, increasing the chances that they will complete their education. So
I,
thank you to Alice and thank you to Joseph Buttram.
Well, and what Joe wanted to do with all of this money that he had that he wanted to give in scholarships, it just goes to show the incredible variety of criteria that are used, because his idea was to award students who kind of reminded him of himself when he was in high school. Good student, good kid, difficult circumstances. And that's what he decided to do with his vast wealth, and we're grateful. We have perfect timing here and lots of Q in the Q&A. Many of the questions relate more specifically to financial aid than to scholarships. I know that you can answer those, but I think I'm going to ask you some of the more scholarship related ones first. But there was one thing that you said early on, and someone was just a bit confused. And so that is, did you say that the FAFSA applies only to 1% of the US university population? No.
No. So let me clarify. The 1% reference was made. There are 2,500 colleges and universities here in the US. Less than 1% of those colleges claim to meet the full financial need of a student. So in other words, Stanford meets the full cost of education. There are a few Harvard, so it's less than 1% of the 2,500 colleges. But no, the FAFSA applies to I can't say that it applies to all 2,500, but it applies to most of those colleges as well. There are some universities who are exempt from the FAFSA, or who have opted not to participate in the FAFSA for different reasons. There's one religious university up in Indiana that doesn't participate in federal aid, and they've chosen to exempt themselves from federal student aid. So the academies, the military academies do not qualify for federal aid as well. So students going to an academy cannot receive any outside scholarships, and they cannot receive Pell Grants. They cannot receive student loans because they have a full right at the academy as well. So there are some exceptions to the colleges that qualify for the FAFSA. But the majority of our U.S. colleges and universities, and that's just not 25. The 2,500 is only four-year universities. There are two-year universities. There are vocational schools as well. In total, there are about 5,800 colleges and universities and vocational schools across the U.S.
And I'm just going to kind of reiterate what you said, that the number of colleges that do what we call meeting full need is very small.
Very
And what
small.
that means is if you apply and you're admitted, they will be sure that you can pay to go there. So if you have a very low income family, you apply, you're admitted, those few colleges are going to cover all your costs. Um,
In some cases, it could be merit scholarship as well. And
yeah.
students will receive a full
And
ride. It could be athletics, musical.
And most of those colleges that do meet full need are pretty selective. Thank goodness they're not the only colleges in our country. And you mentioned community college. I've always been the biggest fan of students starting at community college. And when Joe set up our scholarship, he said, let's give it to students transferring from community college. Um, and there's another question about your organization. Can seniors in college still apply for scholarships or grants from Silicon Valley?
Yes, of the 22 programs that I referenced, 19 of those are open to students who are currently enrolled in college. About 17 are open to graduate and high school seniors.
Okay. And another another person asks, at what point can my juniors apply for college scholarships? Honestly, in my 20 years at MA, I saw very few of those. And what we did was, if any came up, we were really diligent in informing juniors. But have you seen many scholarships that juniors? I like your idea of preparing to apply.
Absolutely. And what you can do junior year is help students work on their personal statements, look at some examples of personal statements or essays that scholarship providers are requesting. make sure that they're thinking about who the recommender is going to be. So getting all those pieces together before their senior year is really helpful preparation for students. But most scholarship applications will be open for students as graduating high school seniors. Again, because they'll be selected and then awarded. So if a student is a junior, the scholarship provider would have to wait a year to determine whether a student will continue or not. So again, most applications are going to be open to students in their senior year of high school.
Here's an interesting question. My daughter is of mixed race and does not feel comfortable applying for scholarships tied to her Latin heritage. Can you please advise a student of mixed race on how to approach those scholarships? And I think you could even broaden that question a little bit for any student who has some very specific background or interest or whatever. Shouldn't they feel comfortable? What scholarship programs want to know is, who are you? And if your race has informed who you are, they want to know about that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I would always encourage students to apply for scholarships that they qualify for. Often students might feel like they didn't have a cultural upbringing in a certain ethnicity and they don't feel connected. They might feel not comfortable applying for those resources or identifying specifically in those ethnicities. But we leave those decisions to students, but certainly encourage students to apply for as many scholarships as possible. But if you're restricting yourself, the fewer opportunities you're going to have.
And you know what? That also makes me think of students have been worried about the Supreme Court's affirmative action decision in relation to colleges. And what I have tried to help them understand is that it's not their problem. They can talk about their race, their ethnicity, any aspect of themselves. The Supreme Court decision related to what colleges, how they can use that information. And I would never want students to think, this is a really important part of who I am, but I'm not supposed to mention it. And that reminds me, there's some other great questions here, but that reminds me, scholarships were in the news this week. You and I both saw that article. I think it was in the New York Times. What's going to happen with that about taxing scholarship funds?
There's a lot going on right now. So there's a lot of executive orders that are being reviewed. We have a legal team that's actually reviewing a lot of those executive orders. In terms of college affordability, the taxability of scholarships right now, and this has not changed, and whether it's going to change or not remains to be seen. But at this point, the only scholarships that are taxable are those that are used for beyond expenses such as tuition, fees, books, and supplies are not taxable. If you use a scholarship for room and board, travel expenses, some portion of that scholarship could be taxable. And that's just it's a ongoing IRS regulation for students to report any scholarship that they receive that's used for anything beyond tuition, books, fees, and supplies. But that has not changed. If there are changes, I'm sure we'll be learning about those. But right
There
now,
was a bit of an outcry when it was announced that there might be these changes. But certain scholarships are already taxed, so let's wait and see what happens. Here's a question I really like because I have such strong opinions about this. Are there scholarships paid directly to the student and not the school? There are, but boy, you sure hope not.
That's a great question, and I've worked in organizations where we did one or the other. I've worked at organizations where we sent the checks directly to students, and currently at SVCF, Silicon Valley Community Foundation, all our awards go directly to the institution, and then they get applied to the student's account. We prefer it that way. There's certain reasons why we do that. At the end of the day, we want to make sure students are using the scholarship for educational purposes. We're also working very closely with many of our institutional partners. We've identified the top 20 universities that we partner with. So developing relationships to ensure that students have access to those resources is important, and to make sure that it's not being displaced. Often what could happen as well, if a student receives a scholarship and the institution is not informed and they learn about the scholarship in the next year, they could penalize the student with by limiting financial aid in the following year and follow in preceding years as well. So very important for students, even if the funds are sent directly to the student or the college, it's important for students to report any kind of outside scholarship aid to the institution.
So I guess my feelings have to do with having seen scholarships sent directly to a student being essentially confiscated by the family and used for groceries. And I understand that need. I understand it very well, but that's not where scholarship funds are supposed to go. Um, and also, I think sometimes students think if the scholarship money is sent directly to them, the colleges will not know, but you agree to report it.
Correct.
Here's a kind of a happy one.
Mhm.
My oldest son had merit scholarships offered to him from several schools when he applied. We were pleasantly surprised by these, didn't know this was even a thing when he applied. The scholarships were enticements for my son to attend the school. How can we find out ahead of time which schools offer these sorts of merit scholarships? Obviously, we know the few that my oldest son applied to, but we'd like to know more schools so we can include those in schools that our other child considers applying to.
Thank you. That's a great question. I'm not sure if there is a resource that identifies institutions that offer merit, solely merit scholarships. But often the institutions that do offer merit scholarships are often smaller private scholarship institutions, typically that are trying to attract some talent on campus. Those are often the institutions that will be offering some merit scholarships, but I'm not sure if there is a list. I will do some digging. If I do find a list, I'm happy to share with Alice and Charlene to forward to the group.
What about the common data set? Does that include anything at all about merit scholarships? I don't know the answer
It
to that.
does. I don't think it does, but I can't.
And I think some internet searches could easily turn up others, but colleges are really upfront. Like I know when 150 or 60 colleges would visit Menlo-Atherton, they talked about their merit scholarships all the time because it is some leverage for them in attracting good students. So let's see. Oh, the link for where for your, can you say it again, please, for the Silicon Valley Community Foundation?
I'm happy to enter it into the chat room as well.
Oh, okay. That sounds like a good idea. And let's see, there's some more that have to do with ooh, can I answer this one? Where's the best place one can look at examples of personal statements? You know, in my first 2 or 3 years as a college advisor, I would show students examples of really sterling ones and really crappy ones. And then I stopped because a personal statement is just that. It's personal. And I find that students who try to look at other people's personal statements either get a tax of they lose their self-consciousness. I can't write like that. I've never done anything like that. And the key to a personal statement is authenticity. It's got to be your voice. It's got to be personal. I'm saying this as someone who reviews over 1,000 college application personal statements every year. Um, looking at other people's, I think can do a little damage. Maybe you disagree. Do you disagree, Mario?
It's people can take ideas from other personal statements, right? The best resources are probably the high school counselor's office. They might have some old personal statements that they're happy to share. Students who have given permission to share their personal statements. But this is actually a great question, and we do have AI available, ChatGPT these days. One of the things that we try to work with students is how to use and how to navigate through AI so that they're not penalizing themselves or hurting themselves by not writing their own work, but it's about checking their work and using some of this for ideas, to take ideas, but at the end, you want to make sure students are writing their own personal statements and their own essays. But it's also a way to check to see if, ChatGPT can provide you with some feedback on your essays and so forth, but always construct the essay on your own and have ChatGPT provide some ideas on how you can strengthen that essay as well.
Yeah, I mean, just this year, I have spotted several where I thought this is not the student's voice. There's no 17-year-old kid who writes like this. And there's a thoughtful and not at all scolding way that I ask students about their work. And boy, if I can spot it, certainly the colleges and the scholarship groups can spot it too. Um,
Absolutely. And that's why we want to make sure that students are understanding how to use AI, not to write a personal statement, but to strengthen your personal statement.
just authenticity all the way. And you know, the reason they sometimes use AI past the point we would like them to is because someone's given them the idea that their writing for these needs to be fancy and that their own writing isn't good enough. And I just have to tell them their own authentic writing is not only good enough, but it's exactly what the scholarship people and colleges
Uh,
want want to
Absolutely.
hear.
We have 5 prompts in our personal statements, and we give students the option of submitting an essay, submitting bullet points, submitting poetry, short story, whatever option. Students, the quality of the writing or the student's ability to write varies across students. So we always want to make sure that students have the opportunity to write a strong personal statement that they're addressing the 5 prompts, but regardless of what format it's in.
You know, I see the time. I see we have only a minute left. I hope that everybody has found this really useful. I know I see Mario as Mr. Scholarship and an incredible resource for our community in learning about and applying for scholarships. And I think Charlene probably wants to step in here a moment. Yes?
I do. I do. You know, we never do these events when there's less than 50 questions, and tonight was no exception. So, look, you know, all the clapping hands. This is what I love about technology. But a huge thank you to you, Mario Deanda, and to you, Alice Kleeman. Alice has been with us since the very beginning, 19 years ago. She helped us get this program started. So I will tell you, college admission and scholarships has been the #1 topic since the beginning. But look, this was a wonderful conversation. You two have provided so much information. If we had another 3 hours, we could keep going and we would answer all those questions. But again, we will be sending this video out to everyone who registered. We thank you all for being with us tonight, for all your engagement, all the great questions. I mean, the chat was super busy. Yes, it's confusing, but we think we all got through it and everybody asked their questions. We answered as many as we could. So again, thank you, everybody. Take care. Happy Lunar New Year. We hope we see you again soon. And again, special thanks to Mario Deanda from the Silicon Valley Community Foundation and to Alice Kleeman, the former longtime college advisor from Menlo-Atherton High School, who's still, she says she's retired, but she will never retire.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlene.
Bye-bye.